So hello everyone. Today, instead of doing a tech talk about AI like I do all the time, I wanted to take you guys through my journey, how I ended up on this stage today. And in telling you about my journey, I'm gonna not just tell you what happened chronologically, I'm gonna share with you some of the gems and wisdom that I picked up along the way in hopes that my journey helps shape yours. If you look at my life and you look at my career, I've done some pretty dope stuff. But that represents a very small piece of who I am. In fact, there's a lot that happened in my life that shaped who I am as a person and what I do in this world way before I ever worked at a company whose name you'd recognize. 19 years ago, weeks before my 16th birthday, I was sitting inside of a juvenile hall cell. I had been charged with 3 felonies and was facing a minimum of 27 years in prison if I were to be tried as an adult. I spent my 16th birthday and Christmas inside of juvenile hall. But in that chaos, there was one person in my life who brought balance, my grandmother. She was a teacher, she was a very humble woman, and she was always around me trying to put in a better understanding of what life could be. She loved my light and loved my shadows. But growing up in the environment that I did, the people that I was surrounded by, the people who I saw as successful, were all doing criminal activity. The people who had food on their tables every night, who had sinks that didn't break, who had toilets that worked regularly, were all doing criminal activity. So much like an algorithm, I had bad data in about what success meant, and I had bad choices come out. Sitting in juvenile hall, I realized something, that the imagination is the biggest nation in the world. Your imagination, what you believe about yourself, what you believe is possible for you in your reality, shapes your life. And it also shapes our collective future. But when you grow up in an environment where you don't have access to basic needs, or you don't have someone to, maybe you didn't have a traumatic background, but you don't have somebody to show you what's possible for you, then your imagination shrinks, and you make choices based on that. So I got blessed. I ended up getting a second chance. They created these things called deferment programs that allowed youth who had offended to do a reduced version of their sentence, and then when they would turn 18, their records would be erased. So let me tell you, when I was leaving that juvenile hall, I've never run that fast in my life. I was like, I'm never going back here, ever, ever, ever. And I was so afraid of ending up on a life path that would lead me to a real criminal sentence that I ran away from everything that reminded me of that environment or the people who I made those choices with. I dropped out of high school. I got my GED. And I said, I'm gonna do whatever it takes to get my life together. I got a job at a movie theater, and then I got a job at a dollar store, but I had no car, so I would walk 5 miles each way to go make $6 an hour. And even though I knew I didn't want to go back, I didn't know where I wanted to go. So enter in Chris Jobert. He was a friend of my mom's at the church that we would go to. And Chris saw something in me that I didn't see. He saw that I was passionate, smart, but just making really silly choices. So one day after church, Chris comes up to me and he says, hey, look, I know you're super smart, but I want you to think about, doing something else, because you're gonna throw your life away, you keep doing these choices. And I was like, yeah, you ain't talking about money, I can't hear you. So the next week, after church, he says, hey, I know you only care about money, so come here, I wanna make a deal with you. And he made me an offer I couldn't refuse. He had a big book that he slapped down on the table. And on top of this book, he spread out $1,000 cash. And he said, I know you only care about money, so here's the deal. If you do every exercise inside of this book, I'll give you $1,000. And in fact, I'll give you $100 to start. The book was a PHP book, which isn't something people code in now. And as I was going through the exercises, I wasn't motivated by bettering myself. I wanted that $1,000. There was the new Sidekick was coming out. I needed a new phone. But during that time, this is before YouTube University. And he himself didn't know how to code. He could help me with certain terminology, so I had to figure out how to learn that material. And I realized that just reading from a book and trying to answer the questions wasn't for me. I had to find people I could ask questions to. I went crazy on online forums. Thank goodness none of you know my username. And from that, I picked up a gem. When you learn how you learn, you can teach yourself anything. Halfway through that process, halfway through that book, I started selling websites to small businesses, and that's how my coding career began. Chris expanded my imagination about what was possible for me in my life, and therefore my algorithm for success was upgraded. I enrolled in community college. I got accepted into UC Berkeley, the #1 public school in the United States. And I realized that I don't really have the foundational discipline to be successful at that level. Like community college is a little different than going to like an Ivy League level school. So I enrolled and joined the Army part-time. I became a student, but I also became a servant. I went back to an elementary school in my neighborhood and started teaching 4th through 6th graders. I taught them how to code. I taught them how to fix computers. And this image that you see here on the right is me with Bobby Seale, the co-founder of the Black Panther Party. This image was taken in 2009 in January when I was actively planning the protests for Oscar Grant's death. For those of you who don't know who Oscar Grant is, he was one of the first black people who was killed on film and had it uploaded to the internet. He was handcuffed behind his back on the floor face down, and a train cop came up, shot him in the back, claimed that he thought it was his taser. So in this process, I felt like I was finally starting to learn how to expand my own imagination, that not only could I help myself, but I could serve others, until I got an email that changed everything. On June 9th, 2012, I opened up my military email, and there was orders for deployment. The document said that on June 30th, I was going to be deployed to Afghanistan for 400 days. The picture that you see on the right with my grandma, God rest her soul, was me the day before I went to Afghanistan. The picture you see, on the left. The picture on the right that you see is me 3 months in. Can you see the difference? I was working 20-hour days, nonstop. And I got to work with some very interesting technology. I got to work with artificial intelligence. The folks that you see here on the right is Tony Thomas. He was a 2-star general at the time. He went on to become a 4-star commander of special operations. See, I didn't just go to Afghanistan. I went to the headquarters of all special operations for all military forces in Afghanistan. I was working on some technologies that I cannot talk about without risking going to jail, with people whose name changed every day, and some people who literally were listed as dead, even though we ate at the chow hall every day. The picture that you see on the right is my brother, the one who convinced me to join the military. Ironically enough, we ended up in Afghanistan at the same time together. While I was there, I realized something. Technology is the magic of our generation. If technology could be used to run wars, to determine when a bomb needs to be dropped on somebody from 30,000 feet in the air, then why couldn't technology be used to make sure that every kid has food on the table, or that everyone is able to read and access information equally? So when I got out of Afghanistan, I said, how can I use this newfound wisdom to try to help make the world a better place? I spent some time in Atlanta building AI for school systems before I got a call from someone I was in Afghanistan with, and he said, hey, I'm out here in Japan. I would love it if you came out here and helped us with some AI stuff that we are having problems with. And I said, look, man, I'm in Atlanta. This is like the black gay capital of the world. I have a drop-top yellow Porsche. I am like 24. I'm like hot shit. I am not trying to go to Japan. He said, well, it's a tropical island. I literally was there within a week. And then in Japan, I got a DM that completely changed my life. A recruiter from Microsoft sent me a DM on LinkedIn before they bought LinkedIn. Said, hey, we've got a job for you. Even though it was going down in the DMs, my imposter syndrome did not. I spiraled for a full month before I even wrote this lady back to take a chance. I ended up getting the job, but in that, I realized that imposter syndrome is just a sign that your imagination needs to expand. It's a sign that you need to believe more for yourself. You need to be and become more for yourself. So at Microsoft, at first, I started off in the national security group. So I worked with all your favorite three-letter agencies, FBI, CIA, DIA, NSA, etc. And I absolutely hated it. So within the first 6 months, I had transferred to an innovation unit where I started working on ambient intelligence. So combining blockchain, AI, and IoT together, not blockchain the crypto, that's Lisa's job, wherever Fancyfied is, but blockchain the data store to fully automate environments. Now, I didn't know much about IoT, but I know that I learned how I learned so I could teach myself anything. In that time, I worked with some of the world's biggest companies. I'm actually credited with bringing some of the first enterprise blockchain use cases to market. But pretty soon, I started to realize something. I'm loving working on all of this innovative technology, but a lot of these technologies are starting to displace people who look like me, people from my communities. And I said, I'm not about to get Afghanistan in San Francisco. Technology is the magic of our generation, but I'm not going to use that magic to harm our communities. I only want to use it to help. So this is a real picture of me on my last day at Microsoft, because that's how I felt. From that, I took this phrase, which if you're a rapper, you should totally drop a bar with this. If it's not organically aligned with who you are, then it should be a natural goodbye. The first 6 months that I was at Microsoft, time to go. I didn't like that job. And then as soon as Microsoft as a larger company started to feel out of line, then I dipped. And I joined a company you may or may not have heard of, called Google. At Google, I took a job working in responsible AI or ML fairness. So my job was literally to go and find all of the problems inside of all of Google's algorithms, whether it was racism, sexism, bias, bad performance, and then start to fix them. On top of that, I felt like I could be more authentic. I literally would go to work in pajamas. I dyed my hair a different color, and I loved it. And I was so excited to be there. Being around all those PhDs as a high school and college dropout, I wanted to learn more. So I got a mentor. Her name is Dr. Timnit Gebru. Dr. Timnit Gebru is the first black woman ever to graduate from Stanford with a PhD in computer science. She led Google's ethical AI division. Now, at that time in Google Research, it was about 4,000 people in Google Research. Less than 50 of the people in Google Research, including the offices in Africa, were black. So Timnit often acted as an advocate for us. She would make sure that our voices were represented when we were trying to fix these algorithms. Fast forward to June of 2020. George Floyd was murdered. All 22 of us in Google Research that were black, that were based in the US, were devastated. We wanted to figure out how we could ask Google Research and leadership to do something. But Google Research had other agenda. They had a research all hands that was scheduled, and they were just going to proceed as planned. On top of that, there was a person in the department who was not black who had started a document that said, this is what we're going to do to respond on behalf of the black community. And I was pissed. I felt like we were being muted until Timnit sent this email to Jeff Dean, the head of Google AI, asking him to give us a voice, a space, and a platform. Honestly, I was at a point where I wanted to quit. I had a conversation with my grandma, and she said, baby, if you could see a problem, it's because you got a part of the solution. So looking around, I realized that Google was prioritizing in the racial equity stuff, they were prioritizing like giving money to black businesses, but not necessarily fixing the issues in AI that affected us. See, around that time, a whole bunch of news had started to come out about the fact that algorithms could not see black and brown people. People were being arrested because of bad facial recognition matches. Students in the pandemic weren't even able to log in to their school systems to take their tests. Social media algorithms were biased. Hell, self-driving cars couldn't even see black people. And so keeping what my grandma said in mind, I set out on a mission to think about how can we fix this? Why? Even Google's own skin tone algorithms didn't perform well. And we found out that what the problem was is this wonderful thing on the screen here called the Fitzpatrick scale. The Fitzpatrick scale is a medical scale that was created in 1975 to measure risk of sunburn. But for some reason, this became the default scale that companies use to build algorithms to detect skin tone and to test their algorithms and data set to make sure that it was fair for skin tones. Well, if the darkest point on that scale is a little bit darker than me, then no wonder your algorithms don't work. So I wanted to go through, and I was trying to fix it, and I was like, I can figure it out, I can find another scale, until I realized my grandma said, baby, you got a part of the solution, not the whole thing. So Dr. Gebru linked us up with a guy at Harvard named Dr. Monk, who was working on a scale. We started figuring out a way to validate his scale. He was a social scientist, there was no proof it worked in computer science. And then about 3 weeks after she made that intro, Dr. Gebru was fired from Google for writing a research paper that called out the dangers of their large language models. And that situation got really messy really quick. She said that she was fired. Google said she resigned. Jeff Dean, the head of Google AI, came out and apologized. And in fact, people started to quit Google in support of Timnit. And I found myself forced to make a choice. Do I stay here and keep trying to work on this, or do I leave in solidarity? And I realized something. My ancestors had to trade off physical safety for generational safety. My grandmother, who was born a black woman in the South and was a teacher, in her time could not have been a badge checker at a company like Google. Probably couldn't have even been a janitor. And so I realized that our trade-off is psychological safety for generational safety. That we're being asked to sit in uncomfortable spaces, sit in spaces where people are devaluing us, and make systemic change on behalf of those who come after us. So I doubled down. I decided to stay. Keep the skin tone work moving forward. I created a skin tone research team, which wasn't really a team. It was me and one other engineer who both had full-time jobs. And we started working on the skin tone stuff, trying to figure out a way to make it happen. When my manager found out, she kept telling me to stop doing it. She was like, look, you have other priorities. Maybe you could do this next year. And so I said, F you. Turned around, went around the company to folks who had different skills and talents that we needed and said, hey, I know you already have a full-time job. You're probably already working like 60 hours a week. Can you just donate your time to us? And so we did it, behind everybody's back. We proved that his scale was better. The results of that work is that we ended up improving dozens of Google's products to work better for people of all skin tones. What you're seeing here is the skin tone filter that ended up built into Google search when you're searching for bridal queries or makeup queries, so beauty queries, to make it easier to find images of people who look like you. Also, did anybody see when Google a couple years ago was like, real tone, real tone, real tone in their cameras? And everyone was like, nah, y'all just turned the brightness up. We didn't. We actually improved the algorithms to better capture different skin tones. And that ended up getting its own Super Bowl commercial. And the Monk scale that we worked on validating is now an industry standard. This scale is being used by Meta, and it's being adopted by regulators in the United States. And the best part about this is not only did it help AI see black and brown people, it helped AI see some of the lightest people in the world, people with conditions like albinism. And for me, a high school and college dropout, it gave me my first research paper. I am now a published AI researcher in the Associated Computing Machine Journal. And so along the way, it's very easy to look back at this road I've traveled and say, look how far I've come. I was so stupid when I was in juvenile hall, and now I'm a published AI researcher, and I realize that that's a silent form of rejection. See, when my manager was discouraging me from creating that skin tone team and doing that work, the energy that I pulled from was that same energy of that hard-headed 15-year-old who didn't care about rules, who didn't care what anybody else thought, and said, I don't care what you think, I'm gonna do what I want anyway. And so the gem from that is that we need every version of ourselves. Because we wouldn't be who we are right now without them. Without the stuff that I did and all that walking that I did when I was walking to the Dollar Tree to make $6 an hour, I wouldn't have these fly kicks on. So now I run my own AI consultancy called Malo Santo, which is Spanish for bad saint. Not only is it a homage to the challenges that we face with artificial intelligence, maybe being a superhero, maybe being a supervillain, it's an homage to my own journey of going and being different versions of myself that are both good and bad, and honoring all of them. In our first 6 months in business, we've gotten clients that, companies you might not have heard of, like L'Oreal, LG, Wasserman Music, which books 60% of Coachella, and Hillman Grad, Lena Waite's Emmy Award-winning production company. We're building AI in a way that makes sure it helps more people than it harms, and to make sure that it can scale across geographies, across cultures, and within communities. So now, I want to share my favorite quote with you. All that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. Some of you in this audience hearing my story might be like, bro, that's you. You must be some type of genius, and you was just in the wrong environment. That's completely false. I am not special. I'm not a super nerd. I was just at different points in my life touched by people who expanded my imagination to allow my algorithm for success and possibility to be upgraded. And at every step of the way, I've turned back and tried to do that for other people. So as we're here at Tech Beach, and we're moving on to try to build ecosystems and communities, something comes to mind that an elder shared with me. A single tree doesn't make a forest. We need each other. We need each other's wisdom. We need your unique insights. You don't have to be a super nerd and go learn to code like I did to make a difference. If you're an artist, if you're a marketer, if you're talented, we need all the different types of trees to make a forest. And so when I started this journey, running out of Juvenile Hall, trying to get away and never go back, all I was thinking about was me and my journey. Well, since then, my family has expanded quite a bit. I have 10 nieces and nephews. My mom has been sober for 20 years. I've got a whole host of in-laws whose birthdays and names sometimes I can't remember. And I want to invite you all to think about what you're doing outside of your own context. Build on the foundation left by those before us, building on the life that my grandmother had, where because of racial bias in the US, she wasn't able to live this kind of life, even though my grandma was way smarter than me. So build on the foundation left by those before us so that we can leave a better world for those who come after us. And that is how together we can individually shape our futures and come together and shape a future that serves all of us better. Thank you.